The reason why high-intensity interval training works so well for improving VO2 max, the understanding is that working at a higher intensity of your heart rate, of your max heart rate, that's what the 90% is, leads to better results. It's the intensity of the interval that creates the adaptations. So that being said, how do we know what 90% is?
Welcome to the Legendary Life Podcast, where it's all about taking control of your health, losing fat, transforming your body, and living the life you deserve with celebrity fitness trainer and longevity enthusiast, Ted Rice. What's up, my friend, and welcome to another episode of Ask Ted. Today, I'm going to be answering a question about VO2 max training, and specifically, we're going to be getting into the 4x4 protocol, how to know what the right heart rate range is, and whether training at altitude can improve your VO2 max. So all that and more today on the Ask Ted episode. So what is up, my friend? Hope you're doing well. In case this is your first time tuning into the show, my name is Ted Rice, host and health coach to executives, entrepreneurs, and other high-performing professionals. And even though I've already had my coffee, I'm tripping over my words like usual. Really excited to do this Ask Ted because it's such an important concept, something that I'm really into at the moment, VO2 max training. So let's dive in. And the question comes from Patrick on YouTube. And he listened to my episode 579, VO2 Max Explained, the key to longevity and a healthier life. And in parentheses, how to improve it. Patrick asks, the 4x4 is something Peter Attia suggested. How does one know what 90% is? Also, I have a hypoxia machine I bought for doing Aconcagua. By the way, that's a mountain in Argentina. Had to look that one up. Would this be a tool to help? So first of all, if you want a full breakdown of VO2 max, why it's important, why it's a key to longevity, and also feeling better today. So not just improving your life, improving your health quality or your health span, but it improves your life right away. If you want to learn why, go to episode 579 on the Legendary Life Podcast and listen to that episode. I'm going to be talking a lot more about VO2 max this year because more and more research just confirms it's incredibly important. So let's get into what Patrick asks. So first of all, I want to address something he said. The 4x4 protocol is something Peter Attia suggested. So first, I want to talk about two things. Number one, what the 4x4 protocol is. The 4x4 protocol is a interval protocol, a high-intensity interval training protocol, more specifically, that has research proving that it's effective for increasing your VO2 max. And Peter Attia suggested it. So I like Peter Attia. I think he talks a lot about the important aspects of longevity compared to some other people who are won't name names or throw anybody underneath the bus simply because I can't remember anyone's name at the moment. But I really like Peter Attia. However, one thing that I've heard Peter Attia say is about VO2, is about zone 2 training. And zone 2 training is important. But what we know is that interval training, specifically high intensity interval training, like the 4x4 protocol, works better for VO2 max. That's not me saying that. That's not about what Peter thinks or says. That's what research says. And I just want to make one point here. This isn't about, it's great. I love Peter Attia and other people like him who are putting out great science-based information, but it's not about what he says. It's not about what I say. It's about what the evidence says, because we're all getting the evidence from the same place. Although some folks kind of disregard the evidence in favor of what they prefer to believe instead of what science is showing us is more true, let's say. And I say more true because it's about confidence in something. It's not about 100% true or, but as far as the research is concerned, intervals are more effective at increasing your VO2 max than steady state cardio like zone 2 cardio. I want to say something else about this is you don't have to do the 4x4 protocol. In fact, during that episode, and I'll share the story briefly here, I have had clients in the past, one in particular stands out, Dan. He lost, I think, 56 pounds with me. I've talked about him a lot. He's been on the show sharing his story. And Dan was interested in improving his VO2 max because he follows me, he follows Peter Attia, and he realized it was something that was important for heart health, longevity, etc. And of course, I gave him the 4x4 protocol to do, except the 4x4 protocol really sucks if, depending on what shape you're in. And let me tell you, I'm in pretty good shape right now, and I would have trouble doing it. Maybe not right at this moment because I've been training pretty hard in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But the 4x4 protocol is 4-minute intervals with 3 minutes rest. So picture this. You're on an exercise bike. The interval timer goes off, and it starts the countdown for 4 minutes. During this time, you increase your speed so you're pedaling faster. You're increasing the resistance so that you feel the resistance on the bike, but still you're able to maintain a high output of force. In other words, it's not so much resistance that you slow down, but it is enough so that you feel the fatigue starting to build and build and build. And 30 seconds in, you're starting to feel it. 1 minute in, it's really sucking. 2 minutes in, you're like, oh my gosh, how much longer can I do this? And by the time you get to 4 minutes, you're questioning if a longer life is worth doing 4-minute intervals. And then so after that, you rest for 3 minutes, and then you're supposed to repeat it a total of 4 times. Of course, after you warm up, maybe throw in a little cool down there as well. The times that I've tried this with clients and myself, they've hated it. So what I want to tell you is, although the 4x4 protocol is good, it's science-backed, it's not a good place to start for the majority of people. It's better to start with 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. And I want to say something else. This really isn't about a specific protocol because actually there is an 8x4 protocol that actually has research showing it's more effective than the 4x4 protocol. And what that is, by the way, this is something I used to do with clients too. 8 minutes of an interval with 2 minutes of rest, repeated 4 times. Those are the intervals I used to do. And I would give 4x4s to people as a way to build them up to the 8x4. So start with something light. You can start with, now what I do, I start clients. I've got everybody in my group training, my group coaching program. Everyone's doing intervals. I start them out at 30 seconds with 90 seconds of rest. And I build up from there. Now, I have some people who are in better shape, and I've raised their intervals to 1 minute or even 2 minutes. But in general, you want to slowly build up your intervals instead of jumping into something like a 4x4 protocol. That's my advice from working with people for 25 years. And I've been doing interval training for, let's say, 15 of those years, over half the time I've been in fitness. Anyway, take that. And just know if you try one of these intervals and you're like, oh my gosh, this sucks, know that you don't have to do that interval. You can work your way up to it. Because last piece of advice here before I move on to the next point is you shouldn't feel like you have to lay down on the floor for 10 minutes to recover from your interval workout. If you're doing that, you're pushing yourself too hard. You're pushing yourself too hard. Instead, do what I just suggested. Start with shorter intervals, maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute, use 90 seconds to 120 seconds of rest and build your way up. And slowly increase the interval time and decrease the rest time, or you can increase it as well. Play around a bit, but make sure the goal is that you're coming out feeling better. Don't feel trashed. Now let's get into the second part of the question. There's 3 parts here. How does one know what 90% of your heart rate is? Now you ask, how does one know what 90% is? And what I would tell you is basically, so here's the thinking. The reason why high intensity interval training works so well for improving VO2 max The understanding is that working at a higher intensity of your heart rate, of your max heart rate, that's what the 90% is, leads to better results. It's the intensity of the interval that creates the adaptations. So that being said, how do we know what 90% is? Well, the first thing is, there's two ways of doing it. There's let's say the more technical way, which you can do a heart rate max test. You can Google that, but basically it's like do some type of activity to get your heart rate up to the max. So you understand what 100% of your heart rate max is. Or you can do it the way that, the estimated way, which is 220 minus your age. So if you do 220 minus your age, you'll get your max heart rate, and then you multiply that by 0.9. And whatever that is, that'll give you your heart rate max. And I'll do it right now for you. So I'm 47, just turned 47. Yes, happy birthday to me. So 220 minus 47 equals 173. By the way, I know this isn't true because I can get my heart rate up higher than 170. I can get it up to 180 and change. And that's why doing a heart rate max test is more accurate. However, this is something that can at least get you in the ballpark. So anyway, 220 minus my age, so 220 minus 47 is 173. Then I'm going to multiply that by 0.9, and that gives me 155.7. So that would be 90% of my heart rate max. What that means is during the intervals, what I want to do is get my heart rate up to 155 or more. And I want to keep it there for 4 minutes. It's as terrible as it sounds, especially if you're not in good cardiovascular shape and you just jump into doing intervals. So that's how you would figure it out. But again, if you are in better shape, I highly recommend doing a heart rate max test of some sort. You can just Google how to do it based on whatever piece of equipment you have. For example, if you're into running, you Google heart rate max test running or heart rate max test cycling, and you can easily get a protocol for doing it. It's really easy. Just you have to do something that gets your heart rate up to its maximum level. Clear on that? Cool. Always feel free to ask questions and reach out to me just like Patrick did. You can ask on YouTube. You can ask on Twitter. Those are the two best places. Or email me. Now I want to address the third question. He said, I have a hypoxia machine I bought for doing Aconcagua. So again, that's a mountain in Argentina. And would this be a tool to help? Now I want to be clear about something. I don't have experience with mountain climbing or a lot of knowledge about altitude training. I understand some basics about it because I've been in this business for so long. I can't help but to know a little bit about everything, but I don't know specifics. So I had to look things up. And one thing I'll tell you is this. I wanted to say a few things. If you are into mountain climbing or anything where you're going to be performing at altitude, your VO2 max is reduced by 1% to 2% for every 390 feet above 4,900 feet in elevation. So what does that mean? When you get to around 5,000 feet, you start to experience a lowering of VO2 max. So for every 390 feet above 4,000, they give the number 4,900. So for every 390 feet above 4,900 feet in elevation, you experience 1 to 2% of a reduction in VO2 max. So if you were to start off with a higher VO2 max, you're going to experience less of a decline, right? If someone starts out with a VO2 max of 60 and they experience a 1 to 2% decline when they reach, 5,400 feet, versus someone who starts at a VO2 max of 40, that's going to be a big difference. Big difference. So this is something, so VO2 max training will help you perform at altitude. Conversely, training at altitude also helps VO2 max. So doing aerobic training at altitude improves your VO2 max. Now, the issue with this is, what are you going to do? Are you going to move to some high, some city? that's high in altitude, like Mexico City. That's the first time I experienced altitude sickness. I flew into Mexico City from Playa del Carmen. And as soon as I got there, I felt weird. And I thought I was just kind of stressed from the flight. So it's not really that long of a flight or anything, but I thought maybe I'm just a bit stressed. But I noticed that I just wasn't that mentally sharp. And I was experiencing some other strange symptoms. For example, I slept terribly my first night. I kept waking up to pee. And I had a conversation with someone who was at the event I was going to. That's why I was in Mexico City. And he said, you know what? Well, you're at altitude right now. In fact, I would eventually learn that Mexico City, they had the Olympics in Mexico City, I think in the late 1960s or early 1970s. That's when all the research on altitude started being done because of what happened. Athletes didn't perform well for the Olympics in Mexico City. And that's how all the altitude research got kicked off. But if you don't want to move to a city that's like Mexico City or I guess Denver, Colorado, the Mile High City, right? If you don't want to move somewhere that's high up or, live in the mountains, there's something called what Patrick mentions. He has a hypoxia machine. And so he didn't mention which one he bought, but I started looking around and it is very interesting. So there's a lot of literature on training at altitude and how it affects VO2 max, sleeping at altitude, exercising at altitude. But there's also things that can mimic altitude so you don't have to go and move somewhere. And the benefits are quite interesting. So some of the physiological reactions is boosted oxygen absorption from your lungs, boosted production of erythropoietin hormone, EPO, by the kidneys. That's what stimulates the generation of red blood cells. If you ever heard of doping for endurance sports, that's what they're taking, something that is similar to that. Not something I know a lot about, to be honest, but again, I forget exactly what they take, but it boosts EPO. And there's also increased capillarization for greater oxygen delivery to different tissues like muscles and brain. And there's enhanced production of mitochondria. So mitochondria work better. There's also a decrease in average heart rate, a decrease in blood pressure, and a decrease in oxidative stress from reactive oxygen species or free radicals. So it is quite interesting. And I want to be clear about this is that I haven't experimented with it yet, but this seems like something that could, number one, boost your VO2 max. And it's something that you can do in your home, but is it worth the money and how effective is it? It's a great question that I don't know the answer to. I've been searching around since I was asked this, and there's a lot of marketing involved. And I've seen hypoxic chambers. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about altitude training products like altitude training masks. Those have been quite controversial. So I'm going to look into that and maybe even experiment with it and maybe get someone on the show to discuss it, because that's a bit new for me as well, that we can buy technology that helps boost our VO2 max while we're doing regular zone 2. So maybe if you're someone who has injuries in your knees or hips or low back or whatever, and doing interval training is very difficult because of those injuries, but you can do a zone 2 session, but using one of these altitude training devices, that would be very interesting. That might be a way of improving VO2 max, but using altitude mass. So yeah, it's very controversial, but I know that technology is evolving, and I'm going to look into that more and perhaps get someone on the show. So just to recap today, we talked about how interval training is more important or more effective for raising your VO2 max than zone 2, period. That's what the research shows. There's no arguments about it. If you want to learn more, go to my episode 579, VO2 Max Explained, the key to longevity and a healthier life and how to improve it. We also talked about the 4x4 protocol and why, although it's been proven effective to raise VO2 max, it is not necessarily what you need to start with. And it's not necessarily the best to raise your VO2 max. I talked about the 8x4, which in one study was proven more effective than the 4x4. And that research was done on cyclists. And the 8x4 was what I've been doing for a long time, since 2019, when I started really getting into this for when I was living in Thailand for Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu performance. We also talked about max heart rate, because when you're doing HIIT training, and this is very important, so many people say they're doing interval training, but their heart rate isn't getting high enough. So it's really important that you understand that heart rate is the key to getting to boosting your VO2 max and doing exercises that effectively increase your heart rate at a level that you can sustain for the period of time for the interval. And you can test your max heart rate by doing a heart rate max test. But if you're just starting out, you can simply use 220 minus your age, which will give you your heart rate max, and then multiply that by 0.9, which will give you your 90%. And you want to reach that or higher during your intervals. We also talked about hypoxia machine training at altitude and the potential for people to get a better training effect using some type of technology. But I don't have the answer to it yet. Even looking for some of the research, it wasn't quite clear. So I'm going to have to spend some time looking into it. And maybe I can even find the top altitude training system and get that person on the show and, figure it out. I think that would be fun, and even more fun to actually train and experiment with something, because one thing, and this will be the last thought I'll leave you with, the one thing that I recommend that you do if you're wanting to get serious about this is get a VO2 max test done. Yes, you can do the 12-minute Cooper run, which can approximate your VO2 max, but having a VO2 max test done with a professional in a lab setting is going to set the standard for how to do it on your own. I believe in getting expert advice, going to the dentist, going to the doctor, etc., using accountants, hiring coaches like myself. Get experts to help you to learn what you need to learn, to set the standard of how things should be done, and then you can start to do things on your own. But get expert. If you're really getting into this, get it tested by an expert, and they'll also give you your heart rate max too during that test. So that is it for today. What's one thing that you can do to make this an actionable episode? That's what I want you to do. Hope you enjoyed this. If you have questions, make sure you email me at ted@legendarylifepodcast.com or reach out to me on Twitter at ted_rice. That is it. Hope you enjoyed this and speak to you soon. And on Monday, I have another great interview for you. It's with my friend Gilles Carvalho. He's coming back on the show. For those of you who don't know him, Gilles is a physician, a research scientist, and he's the host of the YouTube channel Nutrition Made Simple. And what I love about Gilles is he's a plant-based guy personally, but he sets his personal biases aside to present the evidence on nutrition, heart disease, exercise in a way that is both easy to understand, evidence-based, and actionable. So his YouTube content is watched by over 250,000 people. And we're going to be talking about cardiovascular health. So if you have heart disease in your family, if you're struggling to make sense of all the information regarding heart disease and cholesterol, is it important? What tests should you do? That's what we're going to talk about with Gilles in this episode. So if that's something that you're interested in, tune in on Monday. Have a great weekend and speak to you then.
That's a wrap on today's episode, folks. We truly hope that you found immense value in our discussions and that these insights will help propel you to that next level of health, regardless of where you are right now. And if you know someone who could benefit from listening to this episode, perhaps a fellow high achiever or driven professional in your network, do us a favor and share it with them. You never know how much of an impact these conversations can have on someone's life and success. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Legendary Life Podcast. We're on a mission to help you reach your fullest potential, and your support means the world to us. So until next time, stay ambitious, stay focused, and keep crushing your health goals.